Hello, welcome back to the Level 099 videos. This is our second video dealing with the wireless access point, or as some people call it, the WAP, which you guys maybe have heard before with our other...
WAP, WAP, WAP.
As we covered in the first video, the wireless access point, or WAP, is one of the easiest to upgrade things that you can upgrade. But why? Why upgrade? Why add multiple access points? Well, if you're in your home, or you have a dead zone, or you need better coverage, or you're in your underground bunker, you may need wireless access points. The people before you may have installed a Faraday cage to prevent any kind of RF signals from entering, and you have to add an access point inside the RF cage if you really want some wireless access coverage.
With more wireless access points, you also can browse a lot faster than you would normally. So maybe you're doom scrolling on Twitter at all hours. Or maybe you're binge watching videos from your favorite YouTubers at all hours. Or maybe you're reading some fan fiction late at night about the tragedy of the twin sons of Dior and Maethros and the guilt he feels because they've been trapped in the forest and it's winter and they're gonna die out there.
A good wireless access point is also going to help you with reliability. Modern mesh networks can automatically switch channels and control all of that. Maybe not such a big deal for those of us in rural neighborhoods, but if you're in an apartment or the eventual pods that we're all going to be living in, it's going to be critical. You don't want to conflict with your neighbors. Control software might be one of the more annoying parts about a modern wireless setup, and it might seem like something that you really don't need, but it really can help a lot with all these little adjustments and the automatic stuff, and it can make it a lot easier to set this up, especially for a beginner.
But before you run out and buy the first WAP that you see, you're going to need to plan.
Consider the number of devices and not just people in your home, and then think about what those devices use the Wi-Fi for. So you might be thinking of things like your phones, your television, your refrigerator, your toaster, your Hatsune Miku hologram. All these things need to be connected, not just one or two devices.
You'll also need to consider the size of your property. Basically, do you need a mesh? One easy way to know if you need a mesh is if you don't have maximum signal strength everywhere, or at least everywhere you want maximum signal strength. If you go in the bunker and all the radio ends up being dead, you're probably going to need another access point in that area. Now, it is normal for your signal to vary somewhat from place to place. It's just that you don't want the signal to drop out. You always want it to be fast and reliable. And if you want better signal in certain spots, and I'm talking about 5 bars here, 5 bars basically everywhere, and I mean absolutely everywhere, you may be better off adding multiple access points instead of trying to get one super access point that's going to cover everything.
Encryption is very important for wireless, and there is nowhere you can go and run wireless that you don't need encryption. Even if you live in the middle of nowhere, you never know who is sniffing your wireless signal. You have to encrypt. It's not something you can just ignore.
And finally, if you're in an apartment building and they provide Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi was set up with your apartment, generally that's not secure, especially if everybody shares the same Wi-Fi password. You'll want to see about getting a hardwired connection and running your own network.
In this setup, each person could have their own SSID. That means you're all going to connect to a differently named wireless network. You can have your own password, and in your control software, you can see who's using what on the wireless network. This is great for multifamily households or if you're living with roommates.
You may also want a special wireless network for your Internet of Things devices. You can't have Alexa spying on you all the time.
One thing you got to consider is your internal network. Is your internal network fast enough to run the latest wireless access points? If your internal network is not great or you're not sure, stay tuned to this series because we're going to talk about that in another video.
Once you've identified your requirements, you're ready to start shopping. We've talked about a lot of things that were super advanced even just a few years ago, things like mesh, controlled access, multiple SSIDs, but not all equipment sold today supports that kind of thing, especially not stuff that comes from your ISP, and a lot of consumer grade stuff won't have that either.
I'm going to throw some buzzwords at you here, and these are the things that you're going to look for when you're looking for your wireless equipment. First one is Wi-Fi 6. Now if you're watching this in the future, that might be different. Wireless standards change pretty quick. But Wi-Fi 6 is kind of a marketing speak for one of the 802.11 standards, and you want that minimum for this setup. You're also going to look for PoE or power over Ethernet. That lets you run the power through the Ethernet cable so you don't have to have a power source near your access points, which is very convenient. And mesh. Mesh, we've already talked about. It lets you run multiple access points. It deals with them automatically. You definitely want that if you are going to run more than one access point, or you might want to in the future. If you don't run mesh, it's going to be hard to upgrade this later without replacing everything. You kind of want to avoid the common stuff, maybe the stuff you find at a big box store, because that stuff might spy on you. It might be garbage. It's definitely going to be overpriced.
All this means you're probably going to want to go to a place like Best Buy as opposed to Walmart.com.
And this might be sensitive, but it's probably going to get us demonetized because of Google, but don't buy Chinese equipment if you can avoid it. And if you don't know why you shouldn't buy Chinese equipment, you should read more news. Or you should watch the Level 1 news.
As you start to browse Best Buy and you look at the things that are available on the website, there's some things to keep in mind. The first is, what is the wireless backhaul technology? How is it actually going to do what it purports to do? On this Best Buy website, there's Eero and Netgear and Google Nest and some other ones. And so, like, if we take a quick look at TP-Link, TP-Link actually has some pretty honest, probably the most honest write-up of the bunch as to what they do. And it talks about mesh Wi-Fi and, you know, it kind of explains it in terms of their products. But what it doesn't really cover is these mesh Wi-Fi access points. You know, the one that's plugged into your router, that one's wired in. But what about these other ones? Are they just standalone? You give them power and then they'll connect to each other and that'll sort of work. And you can kind of see that in this diagram here. It's like, here's your central unit that's connected there. And then you've got these other, you know, quote unquote deco units. But ultimately the backhaul from one to the other is a wireless connection, not a wired connection. That's always inferior. If you can possibly have a wired connection to each thing that's participating in your mesh network or that's providing the mesh network, then that's going to be a much better experience because it doesn't have to rely on the backhaul. There's also Wi-Fi 6. And so you can use the 6 gigahertz spectrum in the latest versions of Wi-Fi 6 and beyond. So in addition to 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, there's also 6 gigahertz. The other thing you can look for in the specifications is how many square feet does this cover? And all of them, you know, try to give you a thing to estimate that. But it sounds like that you have these really enormous houses and then it'll work. It's like, oh, up to 6,500 square feet. For a 1,500 square foot home, check out the M5. For 1,500 square foot home, use the Deco X20. These are just wild overestimates. If you have a lot of devices, you know, if there's 4 people living in your house and everybody's got 3 or 4 devices, plus you got IoT things, then that range really, really comes down. So the Google Nest, at least the AC2200 as we see it, there's a lot of downsides to it. I mean, one, it's got a built-in microphone and a smart speaker, and it's got all these, you know, Google features, and it's like, can I just have this without that? But even if you don't care about that, it does support the 802.11s mesh standard, which is not well adopted and well compatible across brands. But again, I don't want to get into that too much because this video is not meant to be that technical. But it also tops out at 802.11ac. It doesn't even do 802.11ax, or it hasn't been updated to support 802.11ax. This is still, you know, the same system from 2019, so it's basically obsolete in late 2022. And this might sound like I'm saying don't buy these, but really I'm just saying understand the limitations, because there's other stuff on the market that'll do this, and then when you move from the, you know, prosumer up to the more small business, you mostly get these features. And if you dig into the Eero specifications, you know, their square footage rating is like, this will cover this much square footage, is actually lower. But that's not actually a bad thing, because remember, the strategy here is kind of counterintuitive. Instead of having one access point that's going to cover an ungodly amount of square feet, you're actually using multiple access points that have less power and less range to cover more devices. That works out better for everybody. It's like having somebody in another room yelling into a megaphone while you're trying to have a quiet conversation in another room. You don't really want the access point that's capable of the megaphone, you know, screaming, whereas on a college campus, maybe that would make sense from a wireless standpoint. So as you browse through the offerings from your big box store, they're not terrible, but know what the limitations are of the offering and know if it's appropriate for your scenario. because the costs can be attractive. I mean, a 3-pack for, under $200-300, this is a completely different price class than what you get from the small business thing. And especially if you have a situation where you're wired at home, or you can wire in the other access points, and you find a system that will use that as the backhaul as opposed to a wireless connection, then hey, you'll be a lot better off. But you can look for the newer wireless standards, 802.11 AC, AX, especially if you can get AX, because it's 2022. Everything should pretty much be AX at this point. Then you'll be a lot better off for, the 3 to 5 year term. I would go so far as to say that the stuff that you get at Best Buy is a 2 to 3 year solution, and the commercial stuff is more like a 5-year solution as well. So maybe take that into consideration when you're doing the apples to apples cost comparison.
Once you got your new equipment, you want to get started right away, plug everything up right, but you actually have another step. You're going to need to plan where you want to put your access point. Now, if your access point is on your all-in-one, it's right next to your computer or wherever the internet comes into your home. That's probably not the best place for it. You want to do some exploring and find the best place for it.
Now, for some of our friends, you'll need to consider what your building is made out of. I mean, brick and plaster and older construction materials, maybe you have cast iron plumbing, all that is going to interfere with your wireless signal. That may contribute to the need to have multiple access points and build a mesh. Modern construction, generally Wi-Fi signals go through the floor and ceiling pretty well. You gotta also think 3-dimensionally. What's above us? What's below us? Where's the access point in 3-dimensional space from where you are? It's a fun exercise. Think about those things and play in your network.
You'll also need a good Cat6 cable, and not one from 1985.
Cat6 from 1985? It's a fake! Oh, fake cables!
You may also be wondering, how am I going to power this new wireless access point? Well, with something like power over Ethernet, you don't have to worry about that at all. This opens up a lot of options for location.
Once you finish your installation, now you got to test everything. You can't skip this step. But the good news is that you've already got the tool for that. I mean, you guys have got phones, right? Because that's what you're going to be using to test. You can take your phone, you can get an app, you can go everywhere in your coverage area and see what the signal is. And if you find any place that's dead, you're going to need to either add an access point or move some around.
So hopefully we've encouraged you to replace your wireless access point with something a little less terrible.
And not intimidated you too much.
Or, not just an access point, but the access point part of your network, which was shoved in something that didn't need to be shoved in.
And now we're going to introduce a new piece of equipment that you're going to have to get. And if you got an all-in-one, you probably never even thought about this piece before. It's the Switch.
Not the Nintendo kind, right?
Not that kind.
No.
We'll see you guys next time.
Let us know what your questions are.
Bye!
See ya.